Hi, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you're connecting from. Welcome to this webinar, Conversation as a Transformation Tool. So my name is Loïc Lemarois, and I am a marketing manager here at Headspring. We want this webinar to be interactive. I mean, the main point is we want to hear from you. So please do send in your comments, your questions. So there's a question box on the right-hand side of your screen. Please use that to actually send in your questions, and we'll be sure to answer them. We'll have a short Q&A session at the end, and we'll try to actually answer the most questions as we can. So today we are joined by Alvaro González Alorda. He is a Headspring Associate Professor. He's as well a managing partner of Emergap. It's a consulting firm specializing in transformation management. And as well, he's author of 2 books, Head, Heart, and Hands. And the other one is The Talking Manager. Alvaro, I'm really glad you could join us today. How are you?
Yes, very well.
Glad you could join.
Thank you so much, Lloyd, for the invitation to participate in this webinar. And thank you all for coming from different places and connecting to this webinar. Over the last few weeks, I've been thinking about conversation. And in particular, I've been trying to think about the most difficult or challenging conversation that I have ever witnessed or participate in. And there's one that came vividly to my mind. It was a conversation that was related to the passing away of my brother-in-law, Chus, who was married to my sister Maria. Chus passed away some 8 years ago. They were in love. They were a beautiful couple. They have 5 children, and I feel very connected to these children, especially to these 3 youngest. So let me introduce them to you: Marta, Federica, and Pablo. I live in Madrid. They live in Seville. I travel very much, I have to admit. I spend half of the year in America and half of the year in Europe. I sleep like 30 nights a year on a plane, not so frequently lately as you can imagine with the coronavirus, but then I try to go to Seville to see them as often as possible. And every time we get together, we take this picture of us that we call the forehead monster. We have a whole collection of forehead monster pictures. I remember Pablo told me some time ago, "Uncle Alvaro, can we adopt you as a father?" And that broke my heart. And I told him, "Pablo, your father was an extraordinary man. I'm just Uncle Alvaro. I'll do my best." And that's what I try to do. I get together with them as often as possible. I remember when my brother-in-law passed away, I received a phone call. It was my sister. She was really calm. Next morning, took the first flight from Madrid to Seville. I spent the whole day with them, with my sister. I accompanied her to the funeral place. The 2 oldest knew that the father has passed away, but the youngest didn't. So when we were coming back from the funeral place to her place, I was surprised because I didn't see her crying. And I asked her, "Maria, how on earth you didn't shed a tear today?" In a way, I knew. I knew that she ran out of tears. It was 1.5 years fighting against this monster, that very aggressive type of cancer. But then I knew that day, that very day, I knew what a strong woman is. She was getting ready for a conversation, probably the most difficult conversation in her life, that of telling their children that the father has passed away. So she was very calm. We got home. We were in the living room. She took Marta to her room. After a couple of minutes, she started crying in a very inconsolable way. After a couple of minutes, they came back to the living room. I hugged her. And she did the same thing with Federica, the same cry. She calmed down. She comes out. I hugged her. And the same with Pablo. I don't know exactly when my sister told my nephews and nieces that very day about the passing away of their father. But there is one thing that was clear to me. That conversation was critical because they suffer indeed, but they are not sad. They weren't sad. You can see joy in these kids all the time. And I believe that those conversations that we have in those moments define how we see our life, how we see ourselves. So having the right conversations at that very moment, finding the right meaning. My sister is a woman with a very strong faith, and I'm pretty sure that played a very important role in how they interpret the passing away of their father. And there is nothing probably more difficult than having that conversation of telling your children that your father has passed away, or the other way around, telling your parents that one of your brothers has passed away. And we had that experience too in my family. So I draw the conclusion from these very difficult conversations that we put our lives on the line with the conversations that we hold, and maybe with those that we don't hold. Probably our lives is just getting ready for the next conversation. Over the last few weeks, I've been in Oxford. I came recently to Madrid because of the coronavirus. I was stuck there for nearly a month. It's a lovely city. It was very quiet these days. And I walked by the river, by the Thames many times. And I saw some boats, and you know how rowing is such an important sport in Oxford. When you see those boats in what some people call flow, it's such a beautiful thing. It's not 9 bodies. It's just one body working together very smoothly. It sounds like they make no effort, but they make a very strong effort. It's a beautiful thing to see a team with flow. And I kept thinking about the concept of flow and how it applies to our families. Do we have flow in our families? Do we have flow in our teams? Do we have flow in our countries? Thinking about flow and the components of that level of collaboration, I came up with this idea that there is no human relationship that works without trust, whether it is a marriage, a friendship, or a company. So trust is at the heart of collaboration and building flow. And when you combine trust and discipline, and here is the model that I would like to present to you, you have like 4 types of collaboration that you can get in any given team. So for instance, when there is low trust among people and there is lack of discipline and the work system is not well crafted and designed and operated, the kind of collaboration that you get is defensive. It sounds like, I did my work, but you didn't. So if you don't get this project on time, it will be your fault. It sounds like blaming each other. It doesn't sound very promising to contribute to the transformation of an organization or a team. Sometimes you find a different kind of collaboration, which is artificial harmony. So there is high trust, but there is lack of discipline. And the problem with artificial harmony is that it is artificial. And it is artificial because we are not talking about the complicated issues, because we don't want to destroy relationships. So we put relationships above anything else, but then those relationships sometimes are not so deep and not so relevant because we know that we are not working well. That's very typical in the Latin context. We prime so much the relationships that sometimes we don't broach those pending conversations that we need to broach to work in a more professional way and to have a higher level of collaboration. On the other extreme, we can have a collaboration that we call following the rules. It's based on high discipline, but low trust. It's basically playing by the book. And it sounds like, you know, this is just pure business. This is not, we don't come here to make friends. This is pure business. You give me the results, and then you go home, and you cry at home. You don't cry at the office. It's a little extreme, but sometimes it happens. In Anglo-Saxon cultures, this type of collaboration presents itself more often. So people tend to be more disciplined, but sometimes some people don't have that capacity to develop trust among each other, so developed culturally, let's say. But then I propose that we all work building trust and building discipline to achieve this level of flow. And that's a totally different level of collaboration. Of course, you don't achieve flow overnight. It's a long process. It takes time. And when you get there, you can fall down. And then you need to start working on building trust again and on building discipline again. It's a long endeavor. We all need to struggle to achieve and achieve again and again. But then when we try to understand the dynamics of flow, how to create flow in an organization, I believe there are three dynamics that articulate any organization. And these three dynamics, those things that we do most of the times, are conversations, are meetings, and digital communication. We do everything through these three channels. And then conversations play a very important role in building trust. But the trouble with conversations is most of the time they're focused on the operation, on the day-to-day business, sometimes in the strategy. But what about those conversations on people development? How important is to accompany your team, each person, to understand her personality, her challenge, to anchor those challenges into something specific, achievable, a project of transformation, giving them resources to read, to study, take this video, look at that book, and then accompanying them through the process of developing new habits and incorporating those habits into their daily routines. That's really people development. Otherwise, it's just academic tourism. It's sending people to human resources to be sent to take a course here, take a program there, but there is no accompaniment process. So conversations to develop your people is a priority for a leader. And then feedback. And I'm not referring to any human resources process of evaluation at the end of the year to decide the level of bonus you are going to get. I'm referring to that gift that anyone in the company can make to anyone else when you observe an opportunity for improvement, and far from gossiping behind the back of this person, you broach a difficult conversation and openly and kindly and with strength, if it's required, you help that person to change because you believe that person can change. So conversations are a very important dynamic to build trust. And then we have meetings and digital communications. We're not focusing on these two tools to articulate the organization today. But very briefly, we spend most of our time in meetings, and meetings are a very important way to create culture and to create a higher level of professionalism or dynamism in an organization. So having the right typology of meetings, the right frequency, the right format, a realistic agenda, methodology, different kinds of methodologies for different kinds of meetings, and then having people, different kinds of people facilitating meetings, just the boss facilitating the meetings. And then digital communications. And the problem here is that the information jumps from tool to tool, from WhatsApp to email, from email to Teams, from Teams to whatever. And then if we don't have a use criteria well defined, it's kind of overwhelming. But let's go back to conversations, because been working for 15 years on accompanying organizations through teaching at Headspring and through consulting through Emergap. And one of the conclusions that I got is that there is nothing more transformative than a face-to-face conversation. But nowadays, when conversations are needed to tackle problems and difficult situations, we tend to hide ourselves behind a keyboard and a screen, shooting messages from the distance like a sniper. This tendency to replace face-to-face conversations, conversations that we should have held face-to-face with emails, with messages, creates conflicts among professionals and creates an overwhelming way of dealing with messages from different platforms. Everybody's overwhelmed because we're replacing messages, replacing conversation with messages through all different kinds of platforms. So let me propose like a mantra for these months that are coming after the pandemic, hopefully soon. And one of my mantra for these months that are coming is less email, less messages, and more conversations. And I believe there is much at stake on this shift, since the quality of your leadership depends very much on the quality of your conversations. Think about your leadership in terms of conversations. What's the effect that your conversations create in other people? If you were to be assessed through the quality of your conversations, what could be the result? Are you a good conversator? Do you inspire people? How do you lead people after your conversations? No matter if it is in a family or friendship context or a professional one. How are your conversations? So if you have any pending conversations, we all have probably some pending conversations after this month. Let me propose a very simple tool to define high impact conversations. And in my experience, there are two elements that impact very importantly on the effect of a conversation. One of them is the line of argument, defining a good line of argument, well crafted, simple, sharp, and powerful, with clear logic in it. And then there is empathy, the capacity to understand the emotions of the other person, to recognize your own emotions, and to synchronize with the other person through emotions. So when you see when there is a conversation in which the line of argument is poor, is being improvised, and there is lack of empathy between the interlocutors, the effect of the conversation pretty much is frustration. So you feel like, I should have avoided this conversation because the problem is bigger after the conversation than before. It's impossible to talk with this person because this person is not going to change. Sometimes we say that to ourselves, but when we say this person is not going to change, we're saying something very dramatic. We're saying that we are losing faith in the capacity for transformation of any human being. That includes ourselves. So probably what I'm saying when this person is not going to change everything by email, what I'm saying is I don't want to change. So with this frustrating conversation, we don't get too far. But then we have another type of conversation, is those conversations in which we create rejection on the other person. And those are the conversations that we come to with our logic very clear, with our ideas, very straight ideas in our minds. And then we don't listen, we don't pay attention, we don't try to connect or to understand if it is the right moment to have this conversation, if I am using the right words, if I am connected with the other person properly. And then what we create when we feel in possession of the truth is rejection. Sometimes that rejection is shown in a very open way, and you have a very big conflict. And sometimes that rejection is shown in a very subtle way. But there is conflict indeed in that other form too. So not very promising. We don't get too far by creating rejection in conversation. And then we have explosive conversations, those conversations where you can find a lot of emotions, a lot of empathy, but the logic and the line of argument is not very sophisticated, it's very poor. It's too emotional. So whenever this conversation finishes, it's like a summer storm with a very transient effect. So let me propose that we all work on building these inspiring conversations with our relationships, those conversations in which we are capable of reaching that border that separates us from the other person and their freedom to do whatever they want to do after the conversation. But at that border, we get close enough to give them some reasons to change, and at the same time, to encourage them to change. Sometimes we see the results of these inspiring conversations instantly, and that's very rewarding. Sometimes it takes a little time, and it's rewarding too. Sometimes it takes a lot of time. It can be upsetting, to wait for such a long time to see the results. And sometimes we don't see the effects in the other person. But surely it always has an effect, and always has an effect, especially in ourselves, if we are courageous enough to broach those conversations with the desire to help to transform the other person. So I've been working on this over the last 15 years. I wrote a book, The Talking Manager, on how to define this conversation. And most recently, I wrote another book, which is Head, Heart, and Hands, which is like a practical approach to conversation. It's actually a conversation between a mentor and a mentee. The mentor is an Englishman. The mentee is a Colombian woman. She's a high potential in her company. So they embark in this transformation journey together. And he's the most demanding and tough guy. And she's a kind of a very passionate woman with a lot of talent, but still in her highest level of juniority, let's say. So there is this relationship of mentoring in which the mentor proposes different challenges she has to accomplish. They start with pure business, but then life gets intertwined, and then everything is mixed and complex, as any life is. So I hope you have the chance to read this book, and I would be very, very happy if you told me what you think and how you relate to these characters and to these stories and to this concept. But then let me give you 3 ideas on how to develop the capacity to improve the line of argument. One is identify the real purpose of the conversation. Why am I having this conversation? If the purpose is not nice, if the purpose is not transformative, then you either change the purpose or you don't have the conversation. If you want to hurt, if you want to push back, that doesn't sound like a reasonable purpose. Another tip, and of course, this is just a short session. There's much to say about this, but I just brought 3 tips on improving the line of argument. The second would be defining the key messages. Nobody can stand 7 messages or 8 messages on a conversation. You have to select few messages, several messages, maybe 2 or 3, and they have to be convincing. So the strategic part of defining the right messages and underlying the key words of those messages is important, because people will remember those messages through the words that you actually use to craft them. So make sure that you repeat those words several times in the conversation. And finally, back them up with facts and data. Solid facts and data to back those messages up and make them strong reasons to change. Been thinking about personality and the connection with conversations, and you probably know this model. The DIF is the dominance, influence, steadiness, and control. And it's interesting to see that, first of all, we are not a model. We are a person. We are a human being. This is just a tool. It helps to understand human behavior. But the more you use them, the realization of how complex is the human being is higher, because whenever you say, no, this guy is dominant, then you realize, not so dominant, it's a little more control, and there is some steadiness in her personality. Anyways, this is just a model. But one of the conclusions that I draw when I see conversations and personalities is that the people who are more rational tend to have more easiness to define good line of arguments. They organize better their ideas. Whereas the people with more emotional skills, they have more capacity to craft a message in a way that is more compelling, with more empathy, and with higher level of influence in the other person. This is just a tendency. But then let's go to the tips to develop empathy. And here's the first one: change your inner conversation. Before that conversation, think about what are your thoughts about this person. Because we have an inner conversation, and if we kill the other person in our inner thoughts, our whole body will show that we dislike that person. So changing the inner conversation, breathing, relaxing, giving her the opportunity for having a reason to have behaved like that, trying to be understanding with her perspectives and point of view is very important to start a conversation. Secondly, avoid interruption. That's a very silly way to tell somebody, I am not interested in your point of view. Whenever we interrupt somebody 2 or 3 times in a conversation, we are telling her, I'm not interested in what you have to say, so shut up. Not very promising to develop empathy. And then listen with your eye. That's a totally different level of listening. Is really putting all your energies and your senses at the service of understanding the other person. And your eyes can capture a lot of information from the other person, from her emotions, from her perspective. So listening through the eyes. And finally, especially when there is conflict, advance for as long as possible on common ground. So the reason why we are here is because we want to fix this. So this is our common ground. And then you can make excursions. You can go out to say, well, but we disagree here. But there is a reason for common ground. There is a reason for us to be together, sitting, trying to build something together. Anyway, I would like to finish with a quote and with a daring proposal. Here is a quote that I found very interesting from Joseph Pieper, a German philosopher. He says that the gaze of the lover is not realistic. When someone loves you, could be your father, your mother, your spouse, your friend. They don't look at you with a gaze of a realistic gaze of, so this is you, these are your qualities, darling. You have these virtues, you have these defects, you have such money in the bank. So my Excel spreadsheet concludes that I love you. That doesn't seem like the logic of love. When somebody loves you, they don't use an Excel. When someone loves you, and you probably have experienced this gaze many times in your life, they look at you with a gaze of projection, a gaze that says, and there is no need for words, I can see your talents. I can see your potential. When someone looks at you with a gaze of projection, they say, I see your personality and the beauty of it. You're so special, so peculiar if you wish. But it's very nice to see how your personality flourishes and enrich other people with that particular way of being that you have. When someone loves you, I'm very sure you have experienced this gaze many times. What they tell you is the world would be worse if you weren't here. And when you feel that somebody is looking at you that way, that really creates empathy. And then you feel that your wings unfold and you're ready to fly. And from there, inspiration can happen and change can happen, deep change in people. So can we make people fly through our conversations? So let me finish just with a very daring proposal. A daring proposal for you today is choose a pending conversation. Maybe you have a pending conversation with a boss whom you secretly despise, or maybe you have a pending conversation with a colleague that is demotivated. Maybe you have a pending conversation with a friend of yours that is in trouble and you are keeping your distance with those troubles. Maybe you have a pending conversation with a brother of yours from whom you lost contact with many years ago and you know nothing about him. Or maybe you have a pending conversation with a person whom you used to love with all your heart and from whom now you only expect a bearable relationship. So here is my proposal to finish this webinar. Choose a pending conversation and transform it into an inspiring one. So I hope some of these ideas may help you to prepare the next conversation. Thank you so much. Loic, over to you.
Thank you very much, Alvaro. This was a very, very interesting. I'll try and think about the pending conversation. So we're going to open the floor to questions. We did have actually a few questions come in, so we'll answer them now. But yes, please do send in your comments, your questions. We'll actually try and answer them during the session now. So we had a first question come in, and it was when you were talking about the 3 dynamics to articulate the organization. And so the person was asking the question, what is the difference between meetings and conversation? Is a meeting not just a conversation with multiple people at once?
Well, that's a smart, very smart question. It's actually a conversation with several people, and all the rules that apply to a one-on-one conversation apply to a meeting. So sometimes it's funny when you realize, when you look at, sometimes in our work, we are dealing with different teams, and then we sit down and we observe the dynamic among the people, and you see how they make eye contact with each other and how they don't make eye contact among some people. So you can very clearly and very rapidly see the disconnection about different people, among different peoples in that very meeting. So I would say it is a conversation with several people, and if there is some bit of tension in just 2 relationships in that meeting, everyone can sense it. So that's probably a call to broach a pending conversation with that person of your team and try to fix that relationship for the sake of helping the people to flow.
Great, thank you. So there's another question here. So obviously, in a conversation, you need to deal with, the person's personality. Is there any way to understand the personality, to categorize it? Is there any guidelines that you could kind of, share?
Well, another interesting question. I would recommend to read a book, well, 2 books that would help to understand people faster. One would be Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman. That's a great book. I'm rereading now. And the other book that I would recommend to understand people is Mind Sight by Daniel Siegel. This is a wonderful book written by a psychiatrist. And he tells you how he treats the patients and the different challenges that they have to deal with. And then you see how personality has a very deep impact on behavior. So, well, some people have more skills to read different talents and personalities in other people. So that's something that could be trained. More rational people tend to be a little, let's say, emotionally illiterate when it comes to appreciating the personality of others, because they tend to be so focused on their thinking process that they don't pay attention to what's happening outside. So spending time in silence, listening, observing, trying to read emotions is something that could be trained and that I would really strongly recommend. So if you see in your team people who doesn't have this very well developed, I would recommend to give them something to read that fits their intellect with ideas, and then help them train their capacity to read the talent of other people. But again, my experience dealing with many people over the last 15 years on transformation process, you have to be very prudent when it comes to reading personality. At the beginning, you can have an idea on how the personality of a particular person is, but you need to dig down and you need to be patient, because personality will show after a while, after several interactions, and then you will be able to understand. I remember having a conversation the other day with a top management guy. He's really tough. He's really smart. He's kind of serious. And then he told me in this mentoring one-on-one conversation, after a while, he told me that his father left him when he was 6 years old. And he was, at that moment, realizing that life was tough, that life is serious, that he has to struggle. And he was the first in class in his school, in the university, in his master's degree, in everything. He's been struggling with this through this tough life his whole life. So if he doesn't give you this clue, you don't get to understand why these people is reacting and suppressing emotions in such a way, because he didn't want to suffer by thinking about the loss of his father. But the truth of the matter is that in that conversation, he started crying. A tough guy, nearly 60 years old. and haven't spoken about this to anyone in his professional context. So understanding people, understanding their background, help you to really accompany your team, your colleagues through their transformation process.
No, thank you. I think what you just said is really, really important. And thank you for sharing the story. So I have another question here. I mean, obviously, you know, we are in some countries are in lockdown. So the question is referring to that. So how can we best replicate face-to-face conversation at this time when we're all working remotely and we're overwhelmed with screen time?
Can you give me the name of the person who did that question?
Is Jeannette Purcell.
Jeannette, I'm looking to the little camera here on my screen. Now I'm looking at you. Forget about all these people who are connected to this call. I'm talking to you. I'm looking at you. And I believe we have here a wonderful tool to have a conversation where you can read my face and you can read my emotions. And I would be able to read yours if you were connected with your camera on. So my experience, and I am very surprised because I've been always very much inclined to have face-to-face meetings in the real world. But then I'm realizing that you can connect in a very meaningful way with people if you make the effort to be present, to be here, to be with you, Jeannette. So I hope this answers your question.
I hope she's listening and appreciating the answer. And how do you actually start a conversation with somebody that doesn't actually want to talk to you?
That's funny. It just reminds me of a story. When we were in our university years, I remember a friend of mine, he was very, very focused in life, very determined. So he would go to the disco, to the pubs, and whenever he sees a girl that he likes, he goes to that girl and says, "Do you want to have a large family?" And you can imagine girls freaking out and say, "Come on, take me to dance, and then we will talk about large families later." So I believe that when you realize that there is lack of connection with somebody, you have to build a bridge through small, through little acts of kindness. Sometimes the other person doesn't respond very well, but if you keep preparing like the terrain for that conversation, I've seen many cases. Big words. You have to be patient. You don't have to be upset if they reject you at the first sign or the second. But try to build a bridge of kindness. There is a beautiful book on kindness, which is The Secret Power of Kindness. It's very interesting on how to develop that competency that is so critical nowadays for the world, for family context, and also for professional context.
Great, thank you. And I mean, I think this is a general question. You are a Headspring Associate Professor, and I'm sure you've delivered this program for multiple clients. It would be interesting for us to understand how would this fit in a program, without maybe giving names, but how would that actually fit, with a program, and in which context would it be delivered?
Thank you, Loic. Actually, this is a very important part of a transformation and self-development program that we run at Headspring. The conversation, as I said earlier, is the most powerful tool that we have at hand to contribute to the transformation of other people. So conversation is a key part, and it could be applied in many different ways. One of the key parts is building trust among peers, but also there is a way of using conversation as a transformation tool by helping people grow. So helping people to develop their talents and their capacities. Conversation is a very important tool for that. So it's a key element, a key stone on the transformation and self-development program. And of course, it happens all the time. People leave these programs and then they write you emails and say, I broached that pending conversation with my boss or with my spouse or with this friend of mine, And it's so gratifying to see the impact of this program that we do at Headspring. So it's not just going to a program, doing some academic tourism, and then going home and behaving the same. We really take very much effort and enthusiasm in trying to contribute to really help you to apply this in your real life, in your personal life, and in your professional life. So we hope to have you on one of our programs soon.
Great, thank you very much, Alvaro. This was very, very interesting. I think there was quite a lot of tips that even myself can apply. So thank you very much for that. There's actually just one last question. I think somebody didn't really catch the name of your books. I don't know if you want to explain a bit more about the two books that you wrote.
Let me go back. Let's do it a very simple way. One of the books is The Talking Manager. Let me go backwards because I have them here. Here they are. So one is The Talking Manager. This is a book on conversation. And the other, this is a methodology to define high impact conversation. And then the other one is A Story of Mentoring. It's a book that you might find useful to accompany your people in your organization in their development process. And the title is Head, Heart, and Hands, A Journey of Personal Transformation. So these are the books.
Okay, great. Alvaro, thank you very much for the session today. I personally found it very, very interesting. Definitely a lot of tips that I can apply daily at work, even personally with family, friends. So thank you very much for sharing this. I'm sure everybody as well that connected today found it very useful, and they'll probably think more the next time they actually approach a conversation with their peers or their family. So I'd like to thank everybody that joined the session today. Alvaro, again, thank you very much, and hopefully we'll have you for another topic soon. I wish everybody a wonderful day, and please remain safe, and we'll see you guys soon in the next Headspring webinar. Have a great day. Alvaro, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all for joining the conversation. Bye.
Bye.